I'm Shari Ward. I'm Director of Education and Outreach here at Natural History. I'm very excited to welcome you to this new series, 5 lectures called Beyond Diffusion, the Science of Science Education. And the support that we've had for the series from the Senate of Scientists and our director, Christian Samper. I think this effort of this lecture series really underscores the value we all place on rigorous research here at the museum, both in science and science learning. And I think that the more we develop common understandings about learning science in informal settings, the better we can serve our many different publics here. We've also been very enthusiastic and thrilled by the participation and engagement of scientists in all of our work in the Office of Education and Outreach over the last couple of years, from our Ocean Portal to the Human Origins website, to our new Center for Natural History Learning that we hope to open in 2012 in the fall. I just wanted to thank you all for coming here today and give you just a few housekeeping issues, and then Scott Wing will give a little bit of background on this partnership. I'd like to thank Bill Watson, who will be introducing Bruce MacFadden today, for putting together this really great series for us, and Burma Onat for helping to organize the speakers coming in here. I'd also really appreciate the broader Smithsonian community who is attending this, as well as Natural History Museum scientists, educators, exhibition specialists, and IT. And also, I think we have some people from George Washington University's Museum Education program. So without further ado, thank you for coming, and Scott Wing.
I'm the chair of the Senate of Scientists this year, and also wanted to welcome you to this and give you a very brief insight into why we came up with this idea. Shari had the good sense to send me the email that John Coddington sent her in April of 2009 when we started thinking about this. And he said that the Senate of Scientists Council had been discussing the idea of a sponsored lecture series focused on the science or profession or history or theory of science education. Our idea is to invite the best in the field of science education as speakers in a series of lectures. We'd like to hear about how science education is conceptualized, how it investigates and assesses itself, and of course, how it specifically incarnates in our own situation, a hugely popular free science museum serving distinct communities with distinct phenologies. For the education people in the room, or the mineral scientists who don't know phenology, it's the study of periodic plant and animal life cycle events and how they're affected by climate. So that kind of demonstrates the divide between the two cultures, or at least not the divide, but the lingo difference. In general, the purpose of the seminar series is to introduce two Smithsonian scholars who live and die by their ability to formulate and test hypotheses with data to whatever the analog of that process is in the realm of education and exhibits and outreach. We hope this will build a bridge between scholars on one side and scholars on the other, and approaching this through a worldview, and sort of scientific worldview, really makes a lot of sense. So we also hope that this series is going to foster mutual respect among colleagues on different sides of the house, as it were, and that it will provide us with a shared language as we take on problems that have to do with getting our message out to the public, which is, after all, a big part of what we need to do. So with that, and I told Bruce that you can tell how important you are by how many people it takes to introduce you. So I'm going to introduce Bill Watson, who's going to introduce Bruce.
Thanks for the introduction, Scott. Bruce MacFadden is Curator of Vertebrate Paleontology at the Florida Museum of Natural History and Professor of Geological Sciences, Latin American Studies, and Zoology at the University of Florida, Gainesville. This year, Bruce is a Program Officer for the Informal Science Education Office, a program in the National Science Foundation's Directorate for Research on Learning in Formal and Informal Settings. He's authored over 150 articles on mammalian systematics, paleoecology, and evolution. He has also participated in many exhibits and public education projects at the Florida Museum of Natural History, and published research on how visitors to natural history museums understand evolution. In this area, his publications include Natural History Museum Visitors' Understanding of Evolution and Evolution, Museums, and Society. Copies of these articles for the people in the Natural History Museums Network have been posted to the Beyond Diffusion folder on the shared network drive. Bruce's expertise as a paleontologist, an educator, and a curator, as well as his interest in and commitment to collecting and using data to understand how best to communicate science, and particularly evolution, make him the ideal first speaker in the Beyond Diffusion series. We are happy that Bruce has accepted our invitation, and we look forward to his presentation. It is my honor and my pleasure to introduce Bruce MacFadden.
Okay, I don't like to stand behind a podium. I like to interact with my audience, so I'm going to fire this thing up and hopefully it will work. Can you hear me okay? Oh, yes you can. Can you hear me okay now? Okay, good. Get my handy-dandy changer out to see if this works. Good. Okay, so I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience and some new friends. I want to tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from in terms of my interest both in being a STEM content scientist as well as being interested in museum education. So to speak, I grew up at the American Museum of Natural History. My mother used to bring me in on the train when I was 4 and 5 years old. And I was one of those screaming little kids who loved dinosaurs. And I never grew up. Okay? Then I returned to the American Museum of Natural History when I was a graduate student. And you might say that I took a traditional course of study to become a paleontologist. So I come from what's called the STEM content background. My advisor, who I studied fossil horses with, literally lived in an ivory tower right up there at the southeast corner of the American Museum of Natural History. And I was infused with an understanding of what was important in terms of what I was supposed to do as a STEM content scientist, and that was do research and publish papers about science in peer-reviewed journals, period. Okay? The thought of me reaching out to the millions of folks, or millions of folks that run around the halls of the museum, 365 or however many days a year, was never really communicated to me by my advisor, although since that time I've become very interested in that enterprise in terms of what natural history museums should be doing. And then since 1977 I've been a curator of vertebrate paleontology, as Bill said. I've held various administrative posts, including chair of our research and collections department. But in addition, when the opportunity came up to build a new exhibits museum, from the ground up, it was literally an empty box that needed exhibits to be built. I guess I'm a risk taker. I like to do new things and stretch myself intellectually. So I became Associate Director of Exhibits and Public Programs, having no experience or background or formal training in doing that. Okay, I should also say that I have no formal experience or training in communication, but I hope that my title, Communicating Evolution, is okay today. Anyway, where I really, and the reason I'm bold-facing this is where I really got it, about what a holistic view of a museum should be about. It's not just about what we do behind the scenes, it's about who we impact, those folks walking through the exhibit halls. And had I not been the Associate Director of Exhibits and Public Programs, I wouldn't have really gotten it. And to me that was a really life-changing experience in terms of my career. Okay, and then that also gave me an opportunity to be a rotator. I'm at NSF for a year in Informal Science Education, and that's currently my current post. Okay, so my outline for the talk, my talk outline is as follows. I'm going to do a little bit of introduction about the concept of epistemology, of objective knowledge, and how we understand evolution from objective knowledge. And then a little bit of a review for most of you about what's going on in terms of understanding and the acceptance of evolution in the US today. This probably will come as no surprise to most of you, but I just want to make sure we're all on equal footing. I had a hard time, I wrestled with this talk because I realized that I had a diverse audience. And some of what I'm going to talk about today will be sort of old hat to science educators, and other stuff that I'll be talking about will be sort of, oh, I already know that as a paleontologist, but I feel that I need to make sure that both groups here understand both sides. So bear with me if you understand sort of basic stuff that I'm talking about. I feel I need to frame the talk with those two those two thoughts in mind. And then I want to talk about the history of communicating evolution in museums over the past 150 years or so. I'll specifically use a case example, nearest and dearest to my heart, which will come as no surprise to those of you who know me. I'm going to talk about how fossil horses have influenced our understanding of evolution as communication exhibits in museums. Then I'm going to talk about the research project that I was involved in with colleagues assessing visitor to natural history museums, understanding and beliefs about evolution. And so that's sort of the part of the talk that relates to the evolution research or evolution content. And then I want to sort of have some fun at the end and wrap up and talk about what are future challenges and opportunities that we have in museums. Not necessarily just for evolution, although evolution can be communicated in this framework, but also just sort of the future of museums as I see it or as we see it in NSF. So, we like to, as STEM content scientists, we are interested in objective knowledge, being careful about what we do and studying and producing objective knowledge. And I would argue that natural history museums have the objects, and then the bold face here, the objects upon which we base objective knowledge. So natural history museums are fundamentally important in terms of understanding the stuff upon which we base our understanding of evolution. So these shark jaws like we have at our museum, Bill, wonder if we can turn on the lighting a little bit? You working on that? Okay, good, thanks. And then here's one of my favorite museum exhibits is in Paris. It's Cuvier's Hall of Fossils. And the cool thing about this is that the objects are the same. That they're the same as when Cuvier studied them almost 200 years ago. But our knowledge has evolved about those objects. So even though as science evolves and our thinking evolves, the objects or the objects upon which objective knowledge is based remains the same. That's really important because the museums are the repository of those objects. We can pick up the same specimens that Charles, if you wear gloves or whatever, the same specimens that Charles Darwin looked at or collected when he was on the voyage of the Beagle, okay? And we can interpret those in 21st century context of how we do science, or what we know about science, but the objects themselves are the same. So that's fundamentally what natural history museums are about. It's the only place that we can go to find the objects stored in perpetuity for the understanding of objective knowledge in evolution. Natural history museums can have an enormous impact on society. More than 50 million visitors in a year in the United States go to natural history museums, and the numbers worldwide are probably about 100 million visitors go to natural history museums. So therefore, we have the opportunity to make a great impact on society through the visitors who come through our doors in natural history museums. Is the microphone okay in the back? Can you hear me okay in the back? Good. So, I want to talk about informal science and lifelong learning and museums as venue for these enterprises. So, learning, I'm in the Division of Research and Learning, and the two main subdivisions of our unit in SF is the formal education and the informal education. Of course, formal education deals with the kind of learning that occurs in a classroom setting. And informal learning occurs anywhere else outside the classroom. You'll hear from John Falk in a subsequent lecture in this series about what's called free choice learning. Okay? Informal learning is related to free choice learning. People go to museums because they want to go, or zoos, or botanical parks, aquaria, what have you. They are choosing on their own to invest their time in learning through this free choice environment that John Falk will probably talk about. So, the thing that most people don't understand, that I find astounding is, let's do a little quiz here. What percentage of a person's lifetime, what percentage of a person's waking hours during their lifetime do they learn in the classroom? And assume we're talking about somebody in the United States and that person is going to live for about 75 years. What do you guess, or you can do a back-of-the-envelope calculation, what percentage of that person's lifetime do they spend learning in school? What do you think? Less than 5%? I did this. Okay, less than 10%, I was generous. So the point is that school captures the opportunity for people to learn about science for only a very small portion of that person's lifetime. And the other 90% of that person's lifetime is an opportunity where lifelong learning occurs, or has the potential to occur, for that individual. That's why what we do here, and the kinds of things that go on in a museum like this, are so important in terms of how we impact a person's lifetime understanding about science. Well, I just want to make sure that you all know, you probably read this Newsweek article as I did, that since 2001, 37 states have required or encouraged teaching of creationism along with evolution, despite the fact that the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that the teaching of creationism is unconstitutional. However, as we all know, creationism, or now what's called intelligent design, is a serious challenge, an intellectual challenge to the teaching and acceptance of evolution within the U.S. A Gallup poll in 2004 found that 35% of the respondents believe that evolution is well supported by the evidence, and an equal number are not sure. 45% believe that God created humans within the past 10,000 years, and the serious thing is that the percentages have not improved. Improved is sort of they've not changed, okay, since 1980. For an entire generation, for a quarter century, the percentages have not changed. The same numbers essentially the same questions were asked in 1982 during a similar Gallup poll, and the results were similar. And that's scary, unfortunate, and unfortunate. I apologize, I tried to get that out of you can't see some of this is basically an important paper that was published in Science by Miller and others, and basically they asked respondents in 34 countries whether they believed in evolution or not. And basically, you could argue with the design of this because they asked the respondents whether evolution is true, false, or not true. The bottom line is that U.S. ranked second to the last in the acceptance of evolution, ahead of Turkey. Okay, and many of the other countries, the more industrialized countries with high education standards, rank much more highly. The authors assert that the low acceptance of evolution in the U.S. is because of widespread fundamentalism and the influence of politicians on the teaching of evolution and/or creationism. So that's the introduction, and I want to talk a little bit about. Well, I want to talk about how, as scientists, we have communicated about evolution through museum exhibits. And this is a beautiful painting that's in the Philadelphia Museum about sort of the old-timey museums, which were cabinets of curiosity. Okay, individual, almost like a Noah's Ark individual, or a couple individuals of representing diversity of curious animals that live today or perhaps in the past. So, I want to talk about my favorite group, fossil horses, and how they've influenced evolutionary thinking. And our story brings us back to the 1870s with Professor Marsh, and this is a cool photograph of a posed photograph, obviously, of them when they were out in the Western Territories collecting fossils, and of course they look very macho and all that kind of stuff with guns, with the rifles. And then I want to talk about how Professor Marsh, an interesting story that occurred between Professor Marsh and Thomas Henry Huxley, who was, as many people know, said to be Darwin's bulldog, Darwin's champion of evolution. Okay? Before I go on with the story, why do we study fossil horses? And it's because if I told you that I really like calicotheres, I'd have to spend a couple minutes explaining to you what a calicothera is, and then convincing you that those are interesting animals to study evolution. But I don't have to, basically there's an instant recognition of a beloved modern analog of fossil horses, let us say fossil horses. The group, the family Equidae, is widely distributed and abundant in space and time in continental sediments throughout many of the continents over the past 50 million years. They were rapidly evolving during this time, and they're a classic textbook and museum example of long-term or macroevolution. So let's go back to our story. The story takes place at the Yale Peabody Museum in 1876. Thomas Henry Huxley was invited to present a speech at the founding of the Johns Hopkins University. And he came over and was going to talk about the evidence based on this, the fragmentary record of fossil horses in the Old World as evidence or proof of evolution. And as a result of the work that Marsh and his students, the collections that Marsh and his students had made in the Western Territories during the 1870s, Marsh had amassed a rather sizable collection of fossil horses through a time sequence spanning some 50, what we now know is 50 million years, and these were in the Peabody Museum of Natural History. And Huxley visited Marsh for several weeks and was absolutely taken by Marsh's collection of fossil horses. And as a result of his interest in this collection, Marsh and Huxley, as the story goes, and a graphic artist, made this illustration. And this is the Eocene, so about 50 million years ago, Miocene about 20 to 25 million years ago, Pliocene about 2 to 5 million years ago, and of course the recent time. This shows the evolutionary sequence from four-toed forelimbs in Hyracotherium or Eohippus 50 million years ago, and how it apparently changes gradually through time. The forefoot, the hindfoot, the front arm, radius and the ulna, and then the tibia and the fibula, the lower leg bones. Okay, this shows the progression. Here's the loss of the fibula there. But this is a very important illustration. And then, of course, the teeth, going from a tooth of a horse 50 million years ago with a large root and its enamel crown right there, to a modern equus where this is what's said to be very high crowned or hypsodon. And then this is the grinding surface of the teeth, the upper teeth and the lower teeth. The only thing that's not shown here is the change in size, which I'll talk about in a second. But this graphic, but other people, historians of science, Steve Gould in an article in Natural History, have argued that this particular graphic and its pattern has influenced thinking about horse evolution in museums for a long time. Okay? And this is an example of that, but now what we've overlain the original illustration with a change in size. Where here's the 50 million year old horse, Hyracotherium or Eohippus, okay? And these are the actual bones upon which this graphic was based, more or less. But here you see there's a major change in size, from smaller to larger. And this has conjured up in the minds of visitors to museums something about how evolution occurs, trends in evolution. This also, by the way, for a long time, how scientists have thought about how evolution proceeds over long periods of time. And this is called Cope's rule or Cope's law, that within a particular group or clade of animals, there's a tendency towards increased size. Okay? There's also a concept of orthogenesis that was described in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Orthogenesis literally means straight origin. Basically what this says is that there's a straight line evolution from more primitive ancestral form to more advanced descendant forms. Okay? So here we have a pattern of how we think evolution occurs. And this pattern is communicated to our visitors by museum exhibits. Okay? The only problem here is that this particular exhibit is over 100 years old. And that's the way scientists thought at the turn of the last century. The problem is that in many museum exhibits today, 100 years later, you still get this same sort of gestalt, this overall view of how evolution occurs through this orthogenetic sequence. It's very satisfying to line them up from small to large. It makes a lot of sense. The problem is it's wrong. Okay? And we knew over 100 years ago that it was wrong. In this particular illustration from the scientific journal, don't worry about the names. These are subfamilies of horses that existed from about 50 million years ago through the Pleistocene, about 2 million years ago to the recent. And what Gidley showed in actually 1907, but it doesn't matter, that there was branching, that there was overlap between different groups or clades of horses. And in the orthogenetic sequence, it's this straight progression from ancestor to descendant. And Gidley showed it, was one of the first to show that that's not correct. That was over 100 years ago. Okay? Simpson, probably more so than anyone, popularized the understanding of fossil horses in the middle and second half of the 20th century. And illustrations like this here, this complexly branching tree of horses, is more the pattern that scientists know actually occurred as we study the macroevolution of this group. Okay? But, it's interesting, my fonts have completely changed. Okay, anyway, it doesn't matter. After a century and a half of investigations and the advance of scientific knowledge about fossil horses and paleontology, we still have some common misconceptions among the public, if you were to poll the public. Okay? The first one is that that the public believes that horses originated in the Old World, but what we know from the paleontological sequence in North America, that they really originated mostly diversified in the New World. That horses, most of the public doesn't know what Cope's law is, but if you describe to them what Cope's law is, a gradual increase in body size through time, the public would say, based on museum exhibits, oh yeah, that horses exemplify Cope's law. Horses also exemplify gradual evolution, and they exemplify orthogenesis. Okay, and you might say, well, why is that? I mean, scientists have known for over 100. Gidley showed us in 1906 or 1907 that this is not true. Certain aspects of this is not true. Well, unfortunately, and in the textbook that we use to teach vertebrate paleontology at my university, here we have from Benton, and this is the illustration of horse evolution in Benton. What does that look like? It looks pretty much like what Marsh and Huxley depicted in 1876, and now we're in 2009, 2010, and the overall pattern, the sort of gestalt of horse evolution is the same, yet we know it's not correct. And here's the Darwin. I love the Darwin exhibit. How many of you have seen the Darwin exhibit? It was at the American Museum, and then it was at the Franklin. I don't know where it is now, but that's a beautiful exhibit in terms of the essence of museum design with highly interactive, appealing to different learning styles, etc. It's a beautiful exhibit, videos, interviews. It's really great, but contrast here is not great. But basically, here what we have is an Eocene horse, an Oligocene horse. So 50 million year horse, 35 million year horse, or 30 million year horse, 20 million year horse, 5 million year horse, and the modern equus, or its ancestor in the Pleistocene. So here we get, again, it's very pleasing from a design point of view to line these up. It makes a whole lot of sense. And we're still doing it, but it's wrong. Okay? So, why does the public have misconceptions about evolution? It's because we're not doing our job of conveying complex thoughts and modern thinking to them. Okay? And it doesn't just, orthogenesis and all these other things we've just been talking about, gradual evolution, Cope's law, are not just applicable in fossil horses. Many, many different groups of fossils use this construct to understand or provide a framework for understanding about how the groups evolve. These are titanotheres, brontotheres. You have a skeleton on display downstairs of a brontothere. And there are classic studies about how brontotheres evolved with horns, from smaller ancestors. Again, it's very pleasing. It makes a whole lot of sense in terms of simply grasping the concept. The only problem is that it's wrong. So what's wrong with orthogenesis and what I'm talking about? One is it's deterministic, that it implies that evolutionary is progressive, that an Eocene horse groping around in the forests of North America 50 million years ago is less well adapted than a modern horse, and that evolution implies improvement. What's also wrong with orthogenesis is it's not really what happened. We know that. We've known that for more than a century as scientists. Okay? But still, it's convenient to simplify in terms of museum exhibits, and it makes a lot of sense in terms of design. Okay, so maybe we're appealing to simplicity to make it more understandable to the public. The problem is that by appealing to simplicity, we're engendering or perpetuating misconceptions about evolution. And then it gets scientists into trouble. So, for example, when you hear creationists say, "Don't tell me I was descended from an ape," that represents orthogenetic thinking. Okay? It's not that apes and humans shared a common ancestor, which is what we know to be the case. It's that you have this linear progression that gets us into trouble in terms of the pattern of thinking about how evolution occurred, that humans were descended from apes. That's another misstatement. Okay, so now I want to move on to the part that Bill asked me to talk about, so the research that I was involved in understanding how natural history museum visitors, what their knowledge is, their knowledge level, and beliefs about evolution. And then we made recommendations as the result of this study about how natural history museums can better communicate evolution. And I might argue that it's not just natural history museums that have a challenge to communicate about evolution. It's any other place where people can learn about evolution, and it could be in science. It can be in science centers, aquaria, on the web, through various other technologies. Aquaria, anywhere that there's content to be communicated about evolution. Okay, the results of this study have some general applicability to doing a better job in those sorts of informal science venues, in addition to natural history museums. I want to acknowledge that I could not have done this study. The best thing that you can do, and I think that this particular forum and integration of the scientists and the educators is the way to go. I would have never done this study had I not worked as the Associate Director of Exhibits. And Betty Dunkel, my colleague, who has a PhD in science education, said, let's get together and work on a project about what visitors to the museum understand and believe about evolution. We brought in some other collaborators and partners, all of whom I want to recognize today before I present or develop this talk. I also want to say that this particular project was funded by NSF, and the published versions of the study are the two articles that Bill mentioned during the introduction that I was involved in. We were involved in. So, we conducted surveys at 6 museums, including your museum, in 2003 and 2004. We selected the different museums for various reasons. One is that we wanted to have a diversity of institutions, large public institutions, large municipal institutions, smaller university-based museums, and then we wanted to look at geography. As it turns out, the geography was difficult. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But these are the study sites at which we've administered 366 usable survey instruments to a systematically sampled group of visitors to each of these museums. And we developed pre-survey components that we asked our visitors questions about. One is a timeline. You can see here. This is a stratigraphy with fossils in the stratigraphy, the rocks, and then some of the fossils that belong to or are associated with those rocks to the right. Then there was a very interesting study. It was a PhD thesis at LSU about the sequence of life through time, going back to the origin of the universe and the age of the Earth up to the modern day. And I'll talk about this. This was the second thing that we asked our survey respondents questions about. And then there's a fairly significant body of literature from the educational psychology literature about what's called the cheetah problem and natural selection. And we used that and adapted it from learning about evolution in formal settings, in formal, not in informal, in classrooms, okay? And we adapted what was known about that study and used similar protocols to understand informal settings and what our visitors know about natural selection and using the cheetah problem. So the first one, we asked questions like, which of the fossils in this sequence are older, which are younger? This is all intuitively obvious to you. But the question is it intuitively obvious to your public? You're saying yes. Okay. I'm sorry. You're acknowledging the question. Good. Okay. That was good. Okay. And then so we talked about the sequence of rocks and their fossils associated with these rocks, and we tell them we indicate that the fossils have changed in the way they look through time. And then we ask, and then also these fossils live in different kinds of environments. Okay, so we have corals and sharks, dinosaurs, horses, and we ask questions to try to ferret out an understanding of the sequence of time, relative time, ecology, what can we tell about the rocks from the kinds of animals that lived in these environments, and extinction. Why are some of the animals below different from some of the animals above? And a couple of other questions. Those were the fundamental ones. And what we found is that most of our visitors understand the intuitive concept of superposition. Okay? In fact, 95% do. About half understand that the fossils above, the younger fossils, evolved from those below. And about half of the survey respondents understand that the sharks and the corals here indicate a marine environment, and the dinosaurs and the horses indicate terrestrial environments. That's all obvious to us, but we needed to understand whether it was obvious to our visitors, because these results will guide us in understanding what we need to spend more time on in terms of when we develop exhibits. The next one, so Elaine Pulling, this is her timeline where she, this is the present, and this is, let's see, 5 million years, 10 million years, back to 15 billion years. What we did is we had word cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We had 7 word cards with these phrases or words on them: origin of the universe, origin of Earth, life on Earth, fish, land, plants, dinosaurs, and humans. We asked our visitors to order these on the timeline. And this is fascinating. Okay? We also wanted to see if there were any young Earth creationists among our visitors, and we predicted that they would order these word cards differently from sort of our standard other visitors. Okay? What we found is that 81% of our visitors correctly intuited most of what, sort of the sequence that you would expect these events to have unfolded during this period of time over the past billions of years. Okay? So it's obvious to them that that you have to have the universe before the Earth, and the Earth has to be before life, and fish before land. They understand that. Okay. What they don't understand is when all this stuff occurred. I love doing this to graduate students in biology. I give this introductory seminar in one of our what's called A-grade principles course, and most of the students don't have any geologic background. And what I do is, just to get them started off, I hand these word cards out, and I hand this time chart out, and they don't do much better than the public. Okay, so there's a fundamental disconnect between the sequence and the actual time. When did dinosaurs occur? Where would you put dinosaurs on this timeline? Okay, a lot of the respondents had a really fun time, and that's not surprising. Okay, so the cheetah problem. And verbatim, these are the questions this is the framing that we used to ask questions and to determine how our visitors would explain the cheetah problem. According to many scientists, long ago the cheetah had an ancestor that did not run as fast as a modern cheetah. How would scientists explain the cheetah's running ability? Please explain this development as precisely as you can using principles of biologic evolution regardless of whether you personally believe the explanation or not. Okay, so that's sort of hard, that's a stretch for most people, so we helped them along with hints. We gave them a word bank. So the word bank included random, selection, variation, heredity, population, generations, natural selections, and we asked our visitors to use those cards to help them to explain how successive generations of cheetahs evolved faster running. And the results were very interesting. We found that only less than a third could adequately explain the evolution of cheetah in successive generations through natural selection. And the other 2/3 used non-scientific Lamarckian or other incorrect explanations to explain the evolution of the microevolution of the cheetah. So, some qualitative observations or results from our study, that there are developmental differences in the understanding of key concepts of evolution. Kids know all about dinosaurs. They know that dinosaurs lived a long time ago. That's easy for them. Okay? Kids are not capable, particularly younger children, younger than about 7 to 9, I was going to say million years, younger than about 7 to 9 years old, their brains are not capable of integrating evolution because objects are are discrete. And Margaret Evans is going to be, she's on this, she will talk about the fascinating educational or cognitive psychological research on how, during a person's lifetime, they're equipped to understand to understand more complex concepts like those of evolution. Young kids can't get natural selection. They can't get macroevolution from one species to another because sort of everything is, in their minds, fixed as entities or objects. And Margaret will talk more about that later. We found no gender difference, and we found some geographic differences in our results, but those are ambiguous for reasons that I'll mention in just a second. General patterns, and I don't understand why this is. Human subjects, and this is the first time that I ever did research with human subjects. I didn't know what IRB approval was before this, but I certainly do now. Humans just don't, your hypotheses about how they think and what they do and what they know, they're very difficult subjects to work with. They just don't work. They don't corroborate your hypotheses very well. The first thing is that in the cheetah problem, middle-aged respondents use selection. This is the percent of respondents that used selection to explain the cheetah problem. And I don't understand why the younger, by this time in terms of their cognitive development, they should be able to understand about natural selection, but they don't. We're unable to explain this. And then, of course, you see here that by the age of 19 through 34 years, almost 40% of our survey respondents use natural selection as an exploratory framework. Okay, and then the other question is, why is there an apparent decline here? We had a hard time explaining this. We talk about this in the bioscience paper, by the way. The other is that we provided each of our survey respondents the opportunity to reject evolution as a concept in one of our questions. And there was a demographic difference in the rejection that these museums, the Florida Museum, this museum, your museum, and University of Kansas Museum of Natural History had a higher percentage of rejection of evolution as a concept. On average, it was about 9%, as I recall, just under 10%. But these three institutions were statistically higher than were these. Okay, and the first thing we thought was, well, there's some geographic differences, but that's totally wrong, because if you look at the demographics of your museum, you're a national museum. You're not a local museum like the Kansas Museum or our museum, in which two-thirds of our visitors live within 90 miles of our museum. So there's some very complex geographic. You can't just argue that people in Florida reject evolution more than people say people in Los Angeles with the LA County Museum page. It's much more complicated than that. More interesting results. I said that we were looking to see if there were any young earth creationists among our survey respondents, and our prediction would have been they would have taken those 7 word cards and they would have put them all within the past, 6,000 years or so. okay, within the past several thousand years, and that didn't happen. Some of the qualitative responses from our survey respondents allow us to understand fundamental misconceptions about not just the facts of science, but also how science is done. And as scientists, you really have to think about that what we do in terms of advancing knowledge is the production of new knowledge or facts, hypotheses, but the process that we use is unknown to the public, and it's important as scientists that we also communicate the process or what science educators call the nature of science. So the first misconception is, well, the scientist, it's just a theory, so evolution's not that important. Okay, you've heard this before. But that was underscored by our survey respondents. The fact that science is represented by healthy debate is lost on our public because they say the scientists can't even agree whether evolution occurs in fits and starts or is it gradual. Gradual versus punctuated equilibria. Okay? And the scientists are still not certain about things. They still have when they create a carbon-14 date or a potassium and argon-4039 date, they still don't know exactly what the age is because there's an uncertainty there. They don't understand about probability and statistics and how we do science. So a lot of our problem is not just inconsistency in the presentation of the facts, let's say, but it's also the lack of understanding among the public about the nature and process of science. So, fundamental conclusions of our study, there's one that's very clear to me, that evolution is very complicated. It's a complex interaction of facts and theory, hypotheses, and that our visitors to natural history museums have an incomplete knowledge of evolution. They understand some things like superposition a lot better than they do other things like natural selection. That's what we found from our study. So if you think about, you may have heard this acronym VISTA, which embodies the 5 fundamental concepts about evolution: variation, inheritance, selection, time, and adaptation. What I would say is that if you want to invest your resources as a museum, and I know that I'm not using the Smithsonian because you do a lot of this a whole lot better than other places, so don't take this personally. Okay, you need to invest your resources in those components of evolution that the public doesn't understand. The hard ones, the selection. Spend your time explaining about selection and less about superposition because you're wasting your time in superposition. And then spend some time trying to dispel the misconceptions about evolution. Excuse me, the misconceptions about the nature and process of science. That's really important. Okay. Our recommendations to the community, not to you, but to the community, was that rather than have a single whole of evolution, that integrate the content, the STEM content, the evolutionary content throughout all the relevant exhibits within your public programs. If you want to provide a balanced view of evolution, you need to spend more time, as I just said, investing in those concepts that are more difficult for your public to understand, and then communicate about the nature of content, both the content and the nature of process of science in your exhibits. It's hard to retrofit some of these concepts. We actually had a workshop. The Evolution Project funded a workshop at our museum, and we did summative evaluation of our roll of wings here, which is this. This is our required biodiversity center with the Lepidoptera collection that's brought out for public view, and the summative evaluation indicated this. Summative evaluation is basically after you build something, an exhibit, you evaluate how effective it is in achieving your learning goals. And we had a very critical group of 24 science educators and evaluators tell us that we did a very good job with this exhibit of showing the vast diversity of butterflies and moths throughout the world, and that we have large collections, and there are lots of different kinds of things in that collection. We did a very poor job about communicating about natural selection and individual variation as a source of evolution. So then the question is, what do? Do you tear this all down and start? We weren't going to do that. So, and you probably wouldn't do that either, because it had just been up for a year. So what you can do is there are other strategies you can use, and what we thought about. Well, we have some videos. These are plasma screens, and they were now LCD screens. And what you might do is remedially or retrofit into your, if you want to teach your public about natural selection and not just species variation, which we do a good job of here, then you need to somehow integrate that into your exhibit. And the way we would have done that, we haven't done it yet, but we could do it through redoing some of the videos, or perhaps some of the text panels down here. So some ongoing museum evolution research, the stuff that Margaret Evans does about developmental and also demographic differences in learning, about different evolutionary concepts, still is a fertile area for investigation. I'm very interested, I'm not an educational psychologist or a cognitive psychologist, but what does the E word mean to people when they see it? So it's sort of like abortion or stem cell research. The E word you get a visceral response to that, and how does that affect your exhibits? Okay, so I'm interested, I have not seen a lot of literature on this, but I'm fascinated at how, by getting right in your visitor's face, how's that going to affect their acceptance or understanding of what you're doing. We had a conscious decision. We used to name our exhibit halls back in the 70s the Change Exhibit, okay, to get around it. We did. When I first went to the Florida Museum in the 70s, they had a wave of renovations of our museum, and instead of calling it evolution, we called it biological change. Then when we redid our exhibits that opened in 2004, we consciously said we were going to call this the Hall of Florida Fossils, Evolution of Life and Land. Okay? So as not to be implicit in what we were going to communicate. And then I'm very fascinated, and so is NSF, about how we can use modern technology over and above the confines of our buildings to communicate about science. Okay, so I'm a little, about an hour you said I should talk? Okay, so about another 10 minutes. This is the part that I'm just sort of doing free-wheeling thought, doesn't necessarily relate to evolution per se, although it can, but it's basically how should we be thinking as museum scientists about, as we plan to do a better job of communicating what we do to our constituency, either through exhibits or other venues. So I would say the first thing we should do is turn the museum inside out. I'll talk about that in a second. Engage. Engagement, public engagement of science is now a movement. It's not just in the United States, but it's in Europe. Engagement is really important. Understanding is different from engagement. Bring the museum to folks. We can do that in various ways. Appeal to different learning styles. Not everyone learns exactly the same way. And then really the use of emerging technologies as informal science learning tools cannot be under. It's just going to it's going to continue to explode in the future. Okay, so the problem is that visitors don't know that more than 50% of the real estate of most natural history museums are behind the scenes. They just don't get it. Because why? Because they're behind closed doors and walls. So why should they get it? Okay, that's the problem. The solution, and here's, most of our collections in our museum are in these, in the basement, and they're not accessible to the public. So why should they understand that the collections and the research at the core of the museum? They don't see the collections. They're supposed to understand that? That's ridiculous. Okay, so the solution is put your research collections on display. The University of British Columbia Museum of Archaeology puts their research collections right out in the public spaces. Okay? So this is sort of turning your museum inside out. Take the collections and put them on the outside, where the visitors can see them. And then the best example, most recently, of a huge initiative at a very important museum in the world is at the Natural History Museum on Cromwell Road in London, where they did the Darwin Center, where you can hear school kids coming and seeing some of Darwin's, or some original, some of the research collections that they have on display. They can see the research collections, and they actually have behind-the-scenes tours that people can take to look at the research collections. Okay, so engage the public in the process of science, and you do that. You've done that here with your prep lab. This is the prep lab of the Academy of Natural Sciences, where we have a preparator here with some of the visiting public looking and seeing what the preparator is doing. So prep labs are good. Get your volunteers involved in these activities, and then the Citizen Science Initiative, where scientists can work alongside citizens. People from the public can work alongside scientists to make discoveries, is really important in them understanding the process of science. If they can't come to you, bring the museum to them, and one way you can do it is you can go to them. Okay, of course, I give, as I'm sure many of you do, give talks to clubs. This is me giving a talk to a fossil club in South Florida. And then I love to give talks to school groups here. I gave out some fragments of megalodon teeth to some 6th graders in Fairfax, Virginia, and here they are proudly displaying their fragments of the 9 million year old fossil shark teeth. It's very rewarding, it really is. And it's what we should be doing as far as I'm concerned. Appeal to different learning styles. People during their lifetimes learn differently. So if I were to receive an NSF grant proposal from a children's museum that proposed to engage 3-year-olds in learning about natural selection, I would know from Margaret Evans' work that that's not going to work. They're not capable. Their brain is not wired to do that. So there are developmental differences in how and when people can learn, not just about evolution, but other natural history concepts as well. There are cultural differences in museums. People go to museums for different reasons. Some people go to museums to learn. Other people go to museums to socialize. Social learning is a very important activity. I was not aware of that until I went to NSF, but it really hit home to me that the proper social environment can really enhance learning, and it's a good thing to do, particularly in such a beautiful place like this museum. Persons with disabilities, bring them in so that they have access to what you're doing. And then people learn differently. Some people like to see things, other people like to touch things, listen. People like to read. People like to use technology. And any strategy that wants to reach out to the broadest possible representation of your client, of your visitors, should keep these diversity of learning styles in mind. Okay, it'll come as no surprise to you that by the use of the web is a very important tool where we can reach out to millions of people. And this is the well-known NSF-funded Understanding Evolution website, sponsored by Berkeley. And this is a very important way that we can disseminate the results of both the nature and the results of our understanding about how evolution occurs, as well as the process of science. Now, the big thing that's going to continue to explode, it's exploding right now, is the use of social media and technology in informal learning, free choice learning. I heard on the news last night that 5 billion people have cell phones. Or there are 5 billion cell phones in the world. 5 billion. And what's the population of the world? Just under 7 billion, right? 6.8 or something like that. Okay? We already have something. We don't have to give it to our constituency. It's already there. There are now projects where apps are being developed, applications, apps, for smartphones that can teach free choice learners about science. In addition to them coming to the museum, you can communicate to them about science in free choice learning. They're choosing to use this particular handheld device and the application that they can download to learn about science. It's another way that we can reach out. And the cool thing about this is the next generation. The next generation already has this technology. We don't have to teach them about the technology. They're already invested in it. They love using it. So why don't we exploit that to promote science learning? So beyond diffusion, I think this is the next to last slide. What is diffusion? It's this. I just got this on the web. It's the part that I wanted to read is 3A. Dissolved substances. I would say we could say knowledge moves from a region of higher to one of lower concentration. Okay. And then 4, the spread of knowledge from one area or group of people to others by contact. So that's diffusion, or beyond diffusion. And I think beyond diffusion is engagement. If diffusion was what the Smithsonian used as their model, or has used for a century and a half, engagement is what we should use now. We should promote exhibits, collections, research, and objective knowledge, involve volunteers, citizen scientists. We should be mindful of the social and cultural learning aspects of museums and capitalize on the new web technology as well as the social media. Okay, So I've heard from some of you about the Deep Time Project, and this is a major new initiative for the museum, for our museum, our National Museum. And I guess the questions that I'm interested in segueing into a discussion would include is how will the core of your museum functions be communicated to your visitors? How will you facilitate engagement among your visitors? And how will you use museum educational research to inform the design of what we do?
Accepting evolution over a period of 20 years suggests that maybe something other than simply our inability to communicate might be the root cause for that. In other words, that it's really a religious belief you're tracking, and we're not going to be able to change people's religious beliefs. We shouldn't.
My one frustration with this, I agree with you. We've invested we have invested lots of resources in teaching about evolution, but it depends on what our goals are. And if our goals are to convert the non-believers, then we've failed. Okay, and I agree with you on that. I agree that that is something that I'm frustrated about, and I don't have a good explanation for, if that's your goal, how are you going to achieve the goal?
Yeah, well, there's a very powerful lobby that views what we do as a religion. That science is a religion. It's called secular humanism. Mm-hmm. And that when you're in that situation, it's like saying, hello, we're the Jews, come join. Or the Mormons, you pick your minority religion. And it's not going to be successful because it fundamentally is not really the problem you're talking about, which is educational outreach, how to improve educational outreach.
Is that a comment or a question?
It's not. Yeah. We actually have people from the local religious schools bringing their children their worksheets through the paleo and geology calls, find this error in this, find this error in that, comparing it to biblical revelation. So that's probably why your staff.
We have the same thing in Florida.
Yeah.
Baptist schools come in and they make a phone call, and they want to arrange for a school group to come in, but they don't want their kids to learn anything about evolution. And they say, okay, you don't want to go to the fossil hole. Oh, they love the fossils. They have to go to the fossil hole. Well, there's some evolution in there, and then what are you going to do?
Is there another question we can go?
In terms of, you suggested using emerging technology like social media.
Yeah.
And I know there's been anecdotal evidence. I don't know about any public scientific evidence, just that people are concerned that social media encourages just superficial learning. And I was just wondering if that is a concern, if you try to teach things that might be better understood within the context of a museum.
That's why assessment is so important in anything we do, evaluation or assessment. You're saying that there's anecdotal evidence that social media and technology promotes superficial learning.
Yes, I mean just that concepts like evolution, for example, could never be, or even natural selection, or even if you break it down, you can't really communicate that in 140 characters, or whatever the module is for smartphone apps.
What some smartphone apps are doing now is when there's some projects, like there's one called The Call of the Wild, where you take your smartphone to a zoo, and then as you're going, it's like a self-guided tour, and that helps along what you said, because you can't communicate enough content in that small little handheld device, but you can use it to augment the content that's in the exhibits or the displays or the cage or whatever. Okay? Yeah.
Let's get one more question, and then we're not kicking people out, but if people do need to go, they can slip out and ask.
I was struck by your age distribution on the natural selection learning, and it struck me that those students, many who would have had high school biology, and it should have been fresh in their mind, but they had by far the lowest understanding.
Yeah.
And from that, did you infer that natural selection is in fact not being taught in high school biology, or how that relates to actually the sort of curriculum standards?
I don't think we didn't have enough demographics to release. We don't know the answer to that. That's a complicated question. We have to know more about the demographics of the educational background of the of our survey respondents, and we didn't have that information.
Before you go, I just wanted to remind you that there are upcoming talks in the same series, March 23rd, April 20th, May 18th, and June 9th. And I think you can get a, I was saying there's a sign-up sheet in the back. If you want to put your email address down, I'll send you a reminder, and I'll also be sending out annoying reminders to the museum all user, which probably is tired of, but you don't have to get another one for a month now, so that's good. I wanted to say thanks again to Bruce. He's going to stay for lunch, and we were just talking about maybe bringing brown bag lunches from the staff cafeteria, or if you brought your own lunch back up here to eat around this table. That will give more people a chance to chat with him informally. And thanks very much, Bruce, for a really